I knew in embryo really what I wanted to do right off, because in my work, among the great traditions, I'm endlessly pushed back to the principle of compassion. Every single one of these traditions leads me back to this at the core. Do not do to others what you would not like them to do to you, in the Confucian or Jewish version, or in the Christian version, it's always treat all others as you would wish to be treated yourself. And they say that this is the core of faith. My favorite story is perhaps that relating to Rabbi Hillel, the older contemporary of Jesus, who, when asked by a pagan if he would recite the whole of Jewish teaching while he stood on one leg, duly stood on one leg and replied, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the Torah, and everything else is only commentary. Go and study it." Everything else is only commentary. The creation, the story of the Exodus, the Promised Land, the 613 commandments of the Torah, all this, he said, is a commentary on the Golden Rule. And of course, it's a highly provocative piece of exegesis, but it's one of those, but he says, go study. Now, you make the whole of Scripture speak of charity. St. Augustine made a very similar point. Now, but I've been, it now seems clear to me that unless we apply the Golden Rule globally, that is treating all peoples, whoever they are, as though they were as important as we ourselves, we are not going to have a viable world. There's too much power invested in too few people. There's a huge imbalance of wealth. There's resentment and humiliation and distress and alienation. And we are polarized at a time when we are more closely connected, possibly than ever before, electronically, economically, politically, pulled together. And we have to learn now to live together more productively. And it seems to me that the religions, which should be making such a major contribution to this, with this ideology that they have, are often seen as part of the problem. Because all too often, voices of extremism and dogmatism drown out this more compassionate voice. And so, together, Ted and I dreamed up the idea of a charter. Now, my first idea was to have a sort of a group of thinkers from the major faiths writing the charter together, because I wanted it to be a cooperative enterprise, so that whatever our other differences, this we have in common. Ted said, well, you know, nice idea, but a little bit yesterday. Yet another group of boffins sitting in a room and, you know, giving out some arcane document from on high. So they had the brilliant idea of putting the charter online so that people all over the world on a multilingual website could contribute their ideas. So it comes from the grassroots rather than from some, as it were, papal edict from above. And then we met in Switzerland with a group of thinkers, and they took very seriously the contributors. Three of them are over here, and the council members took their suggestions seriously, and together again we wrote the charter. And it's now been unveiled today. Charter is basically a summons to action. It's not a question of us all falling on one another's necks in swearing eternal friendship. It is a question of working energetically for a better world. And I know some of you have had a chance to look at the charter, and it is a call. I suppose the best way to say is in whatever field you are working. Whether you're an educator, bringing up your own children, whether you're in business or politics, certainly, in the law. You have a mission to treat others at all times as you would wish to be treated yourself. Two little things. Confucius, who is, as far as we know, the first to promulgate the Golden Rule, which he said was the central thread that ran through all his teaching and that pulled it all together. When asked by his disciples, Master, which of your teachings can we put into practice all day and every day? He said, Shu, likening to the self. In other words, look into your own heart, discover what gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstance to inflict that pain on anybody else. Do not do to others what you would not like them to do to you. Central peg of his teaching. But note, all day and every day. Because we often say, don't we, oh, well, that's my good deed for the day, as though that was it. And for the next 23 hours, we can return to our ordinary lives of greed and selfishness and unkindness and bitchiness, this all day and every day. I think it does things for you religiously. I think it's no accident that this has become such a central thing, because it breaks down the egotism, which is what holds us back from the divine. You have to dethrone yourself from the center of your world and put another there. And it is, if you do it all day, every day, over years, this has an incremental effect, I think. And brings you, the great teacher said, if you do it really skillfully, it's hard work, it will bring you into relation with what's being called God, Nirvana, Brahman, or Tao.
Thank you very much. Catherine?
Well, this is an exciting day, and it's exciting to be here. And what I mostly want to do is to ask you a whole set of questions, but I'll tell you what they are in the beginning and then just make a couple of remarks, since that's what I'm asked to do. This is about wishes. If I were your fairy godmother, what would happen in the next year?
Yes.
So that's, in a sense, how does this extraordinary alliance that you've put together of people of all kinds from different religions, different parts of the world, as they have all signed on, what do they do next? But just to make a couple of comments, to underline what you said, this extraordinary juxtaposition that we have between the sharp polarization of the world, and it's a polarization of discourse, a polarization of narratives, of the way we frame it, but this extraordinary connectedness that is the characteristic of the world. And one magic that I think you bring to this is the very strong common message of the Golden Rule, but combined with a great deal of thoughtful and in-depth scholarship about what makes for the differences, as well as the common framework of different religions. And that, I think, is the foundation that gives the Charter of Compassion the credibility that it has, that makes it different from some of the other similar efforts. And this idea that, again, I hope we never lose sight of, that the objective is a more just world and a better world, which is what we have the potential for today. We know that in the past it was inevitable that poverty should always be with us, but it's not inevitable today. We can have a world where every child is educated, where everyone has access to health care, where everyone has the chance to develop themselves and to have a job. And it puts a whole new moral dimension onto the ancient principles of compassion, to move it from compassion from charity to caring, and moving in a new direction. But to leave it at that, and to basically, if I can ask you to give us some sense of what happens next.
Yeah, because of course today is the launch, and as I've said many times today, the launch is the beginning of a voyage and not the end. This is the beginning. And it's taken us a long time to get to this point, but now now comes the real challenge. And people keep asking me, aren't you excited, aren't you thrilled? I am feeling a sense of huge responsibility. Now we've got to push this forward. And I'm very fortunate now that we're working with FETSA. 2 representatives from FETSA will help me take this forward. We've got the website, will continue. Plus, we have a large network now of partners worldwide. We have so far 125 partners worldwide. They have their own website. So instead of working, because a lot of these groups have been doing such excellent work in isolation, now we can be as organized as the terrorists in a way, and use the media in this way, because you can't issue directives from on high, because every locality has its own difficulties and its own challenges, but we can share insights and keep the momentum going that way. And I want to do some practical things too, to start off with, because I think the ideas will grow and people will give us ideas on the site. But for example, I'm thinking of a rapid response team, similar to the one that we have on the Alliance of Civilizations, whereby when something crops up, in this case about Islam, in the Alliance of Civilizations, there's a team of us in every country, you know, we're in every a representative who will write op-ed pieces, go on the media, sort of respond in some way to change an uncompassionate discourse. So that's one of my projects. I think, you know, I'm also... Education, I think, again, is key. We want to get the Charter somehow into schools so that children and students are taught. I'd like it to be cool to be compassionate and to raise awareness. I was reading a book which still was talking about mankind and man, and in a way that when the book was written would not have jarred at all, but now it does jar. I'd like there to be a similar jar with uncompassionate speech. And I think I'm in my wilder, more fantastic moments, I'm thinking of compassion societies in campuses, whereby people learn about compassion. They don't know what compassion is. It's so fallen out of the discourse. A lot of people simply think it means pity or feeling sorry for people. So we learn what it is. I'm thinking of a 12-step program, which I would do alongside a group, where we learn how to, you know, and about the insights and the difficulties and the challenges of it. There are loads more of this kind of idea, but the Charter is a summons to action. And you're right. Things like world poverty, it's a religious problem. It's a spiritual problem as well as just an economic one. We have a responsibility for this, and the Charter calls for us to educate. We have to educate ourselves, and this is where you people come in, because you cannot treat other people as you would wish to be treated yourself if you don't know about the other people. There's so much misinformation around at the moment, half-truths, inaccurate sort of presentations. And so a real intellectual effort to get to know the other, to look at terrorism. And why has it happened? The root causes of this, and learn to listen. We talk a lot. A dialogue is one of the buzzwords, but we're not very good at listening. She says, having talked nonstop. So I think I should listen now to another person.
Very good. Assalamu alaikum. Peace to you all. As an African Muslim, I'm very moved and touched by the power of this first principle, and I think that what is particularly resonant with me is exactly that immediate recognition. Everybody can immediately identify with this. And I like in your remarks what you said about the power to transform ourselves. I mean, that change starts here and now. Yes. It's often that we tend to think of waiting for ideal conditions or for the right things to happen so that I can be able to make change. But in fact, change starts anytime, any place, with anybody, all the time. And this is very powerful and empowering. the idea that we don't need to wait for anybody else to do anything because we can start doing it ourselves. And it is that my question to you would be how to bring it to that, because very much I understand the need to spread the word, to use technology, but also the need to reach hearts and minds in a way that inspires.
Yes.
And I think the power of religion is precisely that its ability to inspire and to transform the person before she or he can transform anything else. So it is again how to keep that sort of fire of self-transformation alive and bring it to everybody. I'm thinking of people who would never have any access to email or internet. Yes. And all of that.
Thank you. And you're right. The Dalai Lama always says, when things are difficult, that is the time to practice. That is the time to practice, not when things are easy. And this is such a time. And we don't have to wait for some prophet or something to come along. The prophets have been and told us what to do. Now we have to do it. I think you're absolutely right here. It's not just a question of issuing directives. It's a question, too, of reaching into the imagination, because compassion is a matter for the imagination, like art. And religion at its best combines the aesthetic. I think so I know some of our partners are putting on, for example, art exhibitions on compassion. And we were thinking before I came in of getting together with a museum or something. I'm a trustee of the British Museum, where they're doing a lot of this kind of work to show how artifacts we could help us into other people's lives. But this isn't the challenge. I think there's a real hunger for this. Everywhere I go in the world, east or west, I find this hunger. And the thing to do is to capitalize on that. Of course, sometimes it's just hard being compassionate, and that's why people shy away from it. Sometimes people don't want to be compassionate. I sometimes see mutinous expressions on people's faces because they know they should be compassionate, but what's the fun of being religious if you can't sort of condemn other people or disapprove of other people? There is that nasty bit in us. But I think the only way to do it, and that's why I was thinking about this 12-point thing, which could be done in parishes and where you learn about how it's transformative. I found it's transformed me when in my study. That's just, it's by putting myself into the shoes of people who lived hundreds of years ago and leaving my clever, over-educated, post-Enlightenment self on the back burner. You leave the self behind and enter into the plight of the other. But that's for me. And I think you're right. Thank you for this insight, because I think we need to move people aesthetically too, and so that they have intimations of what it can do for you as a human being, to bring a kind of enlightenment and a new peace.
Thank you. Let's broaden it to the rest of the table, and remember to introduce yourselves briefly.
Hello, my name is Davon Coleman. I'm a sophomore in Georgetown College, majoring in government and minoring in probably theology, women's studies, or history. Kind of undecided at the moment. Yeah, I wish we could do three, but we can't. And I work for Professor Marshall at the Berkley Center. I'm her research assistant. So through my job and through my experiences, I have really come to see the power of faith and faith practitioners in changing communities, especially in the developing world. And I learned a lot just through classes at Georgetown. We have incredible curriculum. I took an interreligious dialogue seminar last year with a rabbi, imam, and a Jesuit. And something interesting I learned about was unique coalitions and methods that can be used to promote dialogue. So one that I found particularly interesting was a recipe exchange on the Gaza border. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, what are the most creative ways that you've seen groups come together and talk about faith?
Well, I think talking is all very fine, again, but listening is also fine. And dialogue, I think we need to go into dialogue prepared to be changed by it. Very often, when we enter into dialogue, it can become a kind of diatribe because we wanted the other person to come round to our view. Whereas the model for dialogue in the West is Socratic dialogue, where nobody won and where everybody ended up realizing they knew nothing. And at that point, Socrates said you became a philosopher because the only wisdom we had was to say we know nothing. Now, we're in that position now because so many of the things that we took for granted have crumbled. Our financial institutions are in disarray. Our political affairs are dire. There's environmental catastrophes, and we don't seem to know how to sort this out. We're engaged in two wars that we can neither win nor end, apparently. And so we don't know anything. So I suppose that I love the idea of the exchange of recipes. And if you'd like to come on site onto our website and give us some of these hints, I think that is fine. But I suppose for coming together to talking, don't enter into dialogue if you're not ready to change. That doesn't mean you're going to convert to the other person's point of view, but that you will be enriched if you have an open heart by the encounter with the other. I've found it simply in my own work that studying the other traditions have helped me to understand what my own was trying to do at its best. You get new insight, and this can be an enriching, adventurous thing if you're ready to let those frightened barriers come down so that you're not saying, how can I hang on to my open out and be prepared for change.
Thank you. Avni?
My name is Avni Mehta. I am a junior in the School of Foreign Service, studying international politics and minoring in Asian studies. In the course of my studies, I've also focused quite a bit on South Asia and been intrigued by the religious tensions within the South Asian countries, particularly in India. It always amazes me that this nation is recognized for its secular nature and for being home to various traditions. Yet at the same time, there are quite a few instances of religious fighting within India. So I was interested in knowing how you've tried to incorporate these histories of fighting between different religious groups into your mission to, instill compassion.
Well, I think a lot of the tensions that we see in religion are very often come from some kind of political malaise or dis-ease. And where there's tension, India's a new nation, and there was and you find in Pakistan too, the sort of the great trauma of the partition. This is a tension, and this is going to affect things, so it's also an identity thing. Who am I? And so. And where there's conflict, very often religion gets sucked in and becomes a part of the problem. In many parts of the world where there is this kind of tension, a secular conflict has been allowed to fester for a long time. So how am I? Do I think I can cure all the tensions in the world? No. But let us not think the Charter makes it clear that any kind of hate speech or chauvinism, whether that's nationalistic or religious or racial, this is not religious. You know, people cling to their religion and they're proud of it, and they should be proud of it. But if once you find that segueing into some kind of denigration of the other, this is the sort of thing I want to prevent. And I want the Charter to empower people so that when they hear that kind of discourse, and then they can have the power to say to their leaders, stop, or this is not right. That's the kind of sensitivity I want to create. But a lot of what we call fundamentalisms, for example, it's not a happy word, I know, have been rooted in a profound fear, a fear of annihilation. In the ones I've studied are mostly in the monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where every single one is convinced that they are about to be wiped out by the secular society or the liberal society, even here in the United States. And so one has to listen to those fears and not just sort of dismiss some of these mythologies, but when I hear all the things you're studying, I feel so jealous. I think I think it sounds so wonderful to be here. But to use the insights that you're gaining here, to listen carefully, listen again to these discourses and do a piece of literary criticism on them, to see the underlying tension and what these people are really trying to say, because they are expressing anxieties in a religious idiom that no society can safely ignore.
So the idea that to get beyond uncompassionate speech, you first need to understand it.
Yes.
Somewhat better. Yes, Maria.
Hi, my name is Mariam Abu Ali, and I'm a senior in the college, majoring in government and minoring in Arabic. I have a few questions, but I'll begin with one. And my first question is that, through my Georgetown education, I believe that, my education has actually made me more compassionate. But in the course of my studies, I've also learned that one of the main causes for the lack of compassion is that one society often views another as the other. And so we dehumanize them and we project our fears onto them. And we depict them as inherently evil or barbaric. And so, unfortunately, in our post-colonial society, we continue to do that. So my question is, how do we go about shattering this image of the other in order to reach compassion?
And you're quite right to say that this, again, it comes back to these insecurities. I've written a lot about, I wrote a lot about this in some of my past work. Not my best work, it was early work. But about the time of the Crusades, for example, which is at the time of, it was at that time that people in the West started to view Jews and Muslims as shadow selves of each other. Of people saying, who are we, and measuring who they are against who they are not, and pushing onto the other a lot of their own buried anxieties about their own behavior. So it's at a time when Christians are undertaking brutal holy wars in the Middle East, that the myth grows up in the West that Islam is an inherently violent religion. You push it on to the enemy and say, he is the violent one. And that's the 12th century monks start depicting the Prophet Muhammad as a warlord, as violent, but again, it comes back to this buried insecurity Europe at that time was a nation trying to create itself after the long period known as the Dark Ages, and fighting back onto the international scene, feeling dwarfed by the mighty neighbors of Islam and Byzantium, the Greeks who looked down on these thugs. And thugs they were at that time. I mean, they couldn't hold a candle in civilization to the others. So, but that is also happening now in Europe. We've got a rise in fascism. I was disturbed beyond measure when I went to Holland a couple of weeks ago, which the Dutch, who used to be the beacon of liberalism in Europe, and now a really upsetting fascism is taking hold, directed against the Muslim communities, with this man Wilders. You must have heard of him. And this is our culture. And again, it's an insecurity. We are changing. We're no longer, it's not going to be Holland for the Dutch anymore. We are living together now. And we've got to, and all these things like Danish cartoons and, Rushdie and things, these are all awful clashes coming from people at different stages of modernization and declaring that their sacred values are the sacred ones. And that means others have to be destroyed. We can't go on behaving in this awful way because the societies will tear ourselves apart. So, again, I think it's a question of recognizing the depth of disturbance and fear that lies at the root of a lot of this. And that doesn't mean just to say we condone it, not at all. But we have to sort of look deeply into the heart of this darkness and study it, and start with dialogue. It's hard because it's hard to listen to some of this stuff. It fills one with a sort of terrible vertigo inside. But we have to listen to it in order to face up to it. And I suppose the Charter for Compassion, because of my work with Islam, I grew out of this constant tension. We had to find a religious way of dealing somehow with these difficult tensions that are so destructive. And destructive also to us, to those of us who form these terrible stereotypes. This is destroying our soul. It's just, in the West, in Europe, if we say we want all Muslims either to convert to Christianity or get out of a country, what is this doing to our integrity, our European culture, our liberalism, our sense of tolerance? We're destroying our own soul if we indulge this.
Thank you. Melody Fox Ahmed is my colleague in the Berkley Center and directs our student outreach.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Well, you mentioned prophets, and I was actually reflecting on several great figures throughout history, prophets and prophetesses of compassion. Jesus, the prophet, peace be upon them, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, and I just wanted to congratulate you for carrying on a tradition as a prophetess of compassion, if I might, in your work. No pressure. But I think after that illustrious history, we're at a really important milestone, a crossroads, because never before has the individual had so much power to join you in this work of promoting compassion. It's the age of YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. The individual has a great power to help you in this work. So how can we as individuals use these new tools now, like as soon as we leave the room, to promote the ideals behind the Charter and really move to action? How do we use technology to change hearts and minds?
Now, you may call me a prophet, but here I have to say that I'm an old prophet who is not really very good at this technology. I mean, I'm learning, I'm doing my best. And I managed to write my books on my computer and do email. And when I got my computer computer in 2000, I kept wanting to throw it out of the window, I have to say. But now, so this is where, but I realized this has been the great thing of TED, introducing me to this world, bringing me out of my book-lined study into the 21st century of technology, because this, and we've seen how technology can be used for great evil, but we can use it for good. So all I would say is go to the website, because there you have people like Anna and James over there who've been helping me with this technology. I'm stumbling. I'm a blind prophet and struggling on. But you're right, it is a tool. And I'm not the person to help you be creative with this. But it is a great tool. It's one of the great things of this TED thing that has expanded my vision, and it does give the individual great power. I've told you we've got a website. You've got one here. I've just seen it. You've got and the partners will also have their own website, as I've said. So. And I'm sure there are all kinds of ways that I cannot imagine that can be used to promote this idea worldwide and empower the individual.
Brittany? Yeah.
I'm Brittany Schulman. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service, and I'm a culture and politics major, and my specialty within that is religion and politics. So I feel like I've taken every class on religion in the entire Georgetown, except for yours, which I'm taking next semester. We'll chat after. But anyway, that's my own thing. But as I was walking here, I ran into a friend, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to this thing for the Charter of Compassion." And I was explaining the little bit of I knew from I read, and he goes, "Oh, that's just more of your liberal rubbish, Brittany." And so my question to you is, when I go back to him, at dinner and answer that, how do I say that this is different? And I think we've been discussing it, but how, in a succinct way, do I say, no, this is different from, the Declaration of Human Rights. This is different than another thing that gathers us together to do good. What's my answer to him?
I would say, first of all, the sense of urgency. We are really in a fix. Increasingly, small groups are going to have powers of destruction that were previously the preserve of the nation state. We've got Europe is about ready. Maybe your friend would be pleased to hear that fascism is on the rise in Europe. But I am not. We've seen in times of economic hardship in the past, this is the time when brutal ideologies arise. If you think of Nazi Germany rising out of the Depression, and Nazi Germany also rising out of the humiliation imposed on Germany after World War I. There are a lot of people feeling humiliated. There's an urgency about this, and it's hard. Compassion is not easy. We all fail hundreds of times a day to be compassionate, and you have to pick yourself up. I'm not a Dalai Lama. I wish I were. We have to. It goes against so many things in the culture. But unless we put ourselves in the position of others and see that people who live in another part of the globe are ourselves, we are now one people, and we have to leave these glaring anomalies as though they were somehow acceptable or written into the nature of things is no longer an option for us. So I know my friends at home glaze over when I mention the Charter for Compassion, and they ask me not to speak about religion when I come round for dinner. So this is... yeah, I can see it. And it sounds idealistic and mushy, but it is not meant to be mush. It is meant to issue in practical directives to delegitimate hatred, because we simply cannot afford it. We simply cannot afford hatred. You're looking puzzled.
No.
And
Wish she was here.
yeah.
Crazy.
Hatred, disparagement too, that sneer. The sneer that sort of, this again, the Charter says is a denial of our humanity. And we've seen an awful lot of the denials of humanity. In the fascism in the 20th century, it was a disaster, because precisely this kind of thinking was allowed to get out of hand. And we've seen what happens when people are demonized or seen as subhuman or neglected. We've seen now the result of this. So it's a hard-headed fact that we've got. If we want a viable world and a just world, we have to learn to be compassionate. That doesn't mean we fall on one another's necks and sing Kumbaya, as Chris said at the we have to get to know one another, as the Quran says, and that involves a serious effort.
Thank you. Corey?
Sure. Hi, I'm Corey Contenga. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service as well. I'm majoring in international economics. And we talked a lot, you equated the charter to the golden rule a lot, so I want to push the envelope on that. Having the charter, having a passion be equated to the golden rule makes me very uncomfortable, because the golden rule to me is arbitrary. It says treat others as you would treat yourself. We treat ourselves differently. As I would treat myself, maybe not be the way that you want to be treated. So for me, I see the golden rule as a moral rule of thumb. But compassion isn't a rule of thumb. Compassion is a moral standard. It's as if Jesus said, he said, there is in the Bible where he says, treat others as you like to be treated, but he also says, love others as I have loved you. That is compassion. Compassion is a moral standard. So I would just like to know, how would you reconcile what I see as sort of this tension? Because I think that using the golden rule is very useful for practical purposes to convey what we mean by compassion. But I think compassion is much deeper than that. And I fear that we could really lose what compassion is.
Okay, I see what you're saying. First of all, it's not me that has equated compassion with the golden rule. It's other prophets.
Other prophets.
of yore who have done this, from Confucius to Hillel, the Prophet Muhammad. This has surfaced. So that has been. I think you see the golden rule as the way in. But, if you are doing this all day and every day, I think it's not just a rule of thumb, because every single moment of the day requires a different creative solution. Now, I'm a little nervous of the word love, because I think I know it's very much used in the Christian tradition. When Jesus says, love your enemies, he's doing a little bit of midrash on Leviticus. When Leviticus says, love the stranger, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus takes it further and says, love your enemies. Now, love in Leviticus does not mean emotional affection. It was a legal term, and Leviticus is a legal text. It was used in international treaties where two kings would promise to love each other, which meant they looked out for each other, took on each other's burdens, were loyal to each other, came to each other's aid in practical ways. This is a start-off. I think if you raise the bar too high and say you've got to love others as I have loved you, I think the word is so misused in our culture. You know, especially if we're a bit buttoned up in the UK, but you know, here everyone's always saying "love you" at the end of a conversation on the phone or something, and really they hardly know you, and all you need is love, etc. Well, again, I think that whole business about love carries so much you know. Are we supposed to love Osama bin Laden? You know, in that sense, it's probably, and it raises the bar so high that we just throw our hands up in despair. So you start off, I think, in a so that's the only reason why I'm sort of wary of love, and I always found it really distressing. In my sort of Catholic years, because I found I was being asked to love God, and I couldn't. I was expecting to feel for God what I was feeling for my parents, or say the cat, even. You know, and this was hard. But I think we have to start off. With the golden rule, if you do it all day and every day, just putting yourself imaginatively into somebody else's shoes, it means you have to see them. You have to see them where they are standing, and put yourself right there. And that demands huge emotional intelligence. It demands a trip from your self-centered preoccupation into their position. It demands, it's not just a rule of thumb, because each moment, each encounter will be different. Each situation will be different, whether you do this in public or in private life. And I think the greater sages than I, people like Confucius, brought that out because it's a way in. And once you've started on the way in, you discover the difficulties and the richness of it. So I think, too, it's helpful to have both versions of the golden rule. Do to others. If people just do to others, there can be a lot of do-gooders around who endlessly imposing what they'd like to see on other people. And sometimes it says, do not do to others, you know, to hold back sometimes. It may not be the question to rush in and bring people democracy or something at a given moment of history. So it's a difficult thing, the golden rule, rather than, I would say, than a rule of thumb. But it was a good question. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we've already opened up so many issues and ideas here. We do have about 20 minutes to broaden things even further to the audience, and we have a roving microphone. And what I'd ask you to do is identify yourself if you'd like to ask a question, and when you get the mic, briefly introduce yourself and ask a short question so that we can fit in as many as possible.
And I'll try and give short answers.
No, that's not what I meant. So who'd like to start? We have a hand over here. Yeah. Please stand up.
Hi, my name is Omar. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service. And my question has to do with fear and hatred. Because there's a term that's thrown around now, Islamophobia, and people who are kind of afraid of Islam. But what I found is that some people kind of hide behind this term of fear when it's really hatred. And how do you distinguish and deal with those people that aren't upfront with what they're really feeling or trying to accomplish?
Well, I would agree with you. I'm not sure that it is fear, but fear can easily segue into hatred. When you are confronted with something that threatens you in some way. That is, and the problem is that things that are essentially finite are being raised to absolute status. and that means cultural things, or things like free speech, which I'm all for free speech, you know, that's fine. But we shouldn't make it an absolute that allows us, therefore, to lambast people who have a different conception of the absolute. So, because we have to learn to negotiate living together. And I think all this is coming about because people are now having, whether they like it or not, to share a society with people who are different. And in the West, America has dealt with it better, but in Europe, we've been abominably bad at it. It's been much better in the Muslim world until recently, where there was, in the Muslim world, you know, before the 20th century, people were able to live together. The Quran is a pluralistic document because pluralism was the norm in Arabia. It was never the norm for us in Europe. And those habits of mind are still there. So there's some kind of, I don't know, malaise, but basically it is because of people with different cultural expectations, which they are raising to absolute status. And there can only be one absolute. Therefore, it means the other has to go. And and people are afraid of change because this living together is meaning that our society, our culture is going to change in profound and unforeseen ways. And so they're hanging on. Now, some people are enjoying the new pluralism. I'm one of them. I found, you know, the study of religious difference absolutely enriching. But others feel it profoundly threatening. And they retreat, therefore, into denominational and ideological ghettos to fight off impending change. Change, it keeps coming back to it. Compassion is about transformation of self. It has to begin with you, rather. And change when you enter into dialogue. And change when you are sharing your country with others. And fear makes us shrink into ourselves, and it impoverishes and damages us. Islamophobia, it is a problem. It's a problem. But don't get into victimhood about it. This is it's easier said than done. But don't let it corrode your sense of yourself, because it's the people who are hating in this way that are less, in a sense, that are being damaged. And Islam has always been a religion of such resilience, even after the horrors of the first fitnas, with the civil wars following the Prophet's death, when you have the Prophet's grandson being killed, you know, by the Caliph, horrifying things, where you'd think, well, the whole thing's finished, or the Mongol invasions, which just destroyed whole swathes of Muslim culture. They came back. Always there was this resilience, and after the Mongol invasions, Muslims created 3 new empires, which had absorbed something from the Mongols: the Mughal Empire in India, the Ottoman Empire, and the Safavid Empire in Iran. And there was a massive spiritual revival. Rumi was a refugee from the Mongols, and his vision is affected by the vision of a positive way of looking at the mosque. So you've got this resilience in Islamic culture. Your job now is to get resilient again. This is another fitna. This is another time of trial. And it's time to draw on that tradition of coming back creatively and from a better point from where you were before.
Thank you. We had a hand up in front here.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Tom Christiansen. I'm a freshman at the School of Foreign Service, getting my generals out of the way. So organizations like this, and I've seen several, I've heard several statements similar to the one that you're making. Whenever statements are made by organizations like this, there's always a danger that the organization will get lost in its own self-righteousness, that the mandate is clearly so good that people who do not jump on board or who don't even initially agree, because whether they're just sitting back to see how it plays out or to study it further, that they're provincial, backwards, fear-mongering, hateful. How does your organization, which is or how do you, and this, as a champion of compassion, show compassion towards these people, as opposed to the several other organizations that have come and gone because they failed to address this concern?
First, this is not an organization.
Well,
it's a movement rather than an organization. And there are plenty of organizations already. I agree with you. This is not another one. Others have said, why don't you start a new church or something? That's the last thing on my mind. But organizations also have one of the reasons why I'm not anxious to found one is that they have an inbuilt tendency to institutional idolatry. The institution can become, or the organization can become, almost an end in itself, and outsiders are therefore not in the fold. Self-righteousness is always a problem, whether you are an academic, whether you're a liberal, whether you're a conservative. This is one of those most unattractive human traits that we all tend to, whatever our persuasions. And so compassion demands constant self-criticism, because you're having to look into yourself, into your own heart, and assess your own fears, and it requires a depth of self-knowledge. I'm surrounded by people at home in the UK who don't want to be, they are compassionate people, but they certainly don't want a bar of this, what I'm doing. But are they beyond the pale? Certainly not. I think what one must, and I think all the things I've been saying about people who have hatred, how a lot of it comes from fear. People who have a jaundiced view of religion. I understand that because I've had a jaundiced view of religion myself for many years. It comes from having a very bad time in religion, perhaps, and not being able to overcome that in the past. There's always something. Compassion demands that you take people where they are, not where you think they ought to be. And there are great models for that. Socrates did it, and the Buddha did it. He would always, when he'd give sort of seminars to people, leading them on to a new enlightenment, and he'd always start with where that person was. There's one lovely story about compassion and his version of the Golden Rule. I'll just tell you quickly. A king who was one of the Buddha's supporters came to him and said he'd had a discussion with his wife the night before, and they both decided that the best thing, the most dearest and precious thing in the world to them was their own selves. Now, this is hardly a view that the Buddha could share. I mean, he taught that the self did not even exist. But instead of giving a whole diatribe to the man, he took him from where he was, and then he said, right, now if yourself is the dearest thing to you, remember that everybody else feels the same. And I think that truly compassionate discourse demands that you put yourself in the position of the other and take them with respect, because you want to be treated with respect yourself. Therefore, you must give that same respect to others. And it's not easy, because, of course, that demon of self-congratulation can always creep in. That if you're really trying to be compassionate, you fail so many times in the course of a day, I have to say, that it's not easy to hold up in your darkest moments or in your brightest moments, a sense of yourself as having achieved it. Once you think you've achieved compassion, you've lost the plot. It's an endless process that will change you. And so if you do it, of course, there'll be people who will be, smugly saying, "Oh, that's not very compassionate," etc. But that is, I would say, a pretty low level. The thing to do always is to go for depth.
Thank you. Other questions? Right over there.
Hi, my name is Shifa. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service, and I was wondering about your suggestions for the proliferation of the charter. Since it was drawn among prominent religious leaders, would you suggest a top-down or grassroots approach to its spread?
Oh, these are not leaders. The people who drew it up, some of them were, there are a couple of them. We had the Grand Mufti of Egypt, and we had Bishop Chain here in Washington. The thinkers are really, but they're leaders who are also thinkers. That the two are not always identical. So grassroots all the way. I mean, people keep asking me, do you think the Pope will sign on to this? And the answer is no, in a word, because, of course, popes don't sign other people's charters. And, they initiate things themselves. This has to be grassroots. If we're just waiting for some leader to come along and tell us what to do, this is not... anyway, they haven't done it, have they? They could all have initiated this kind of approach. And this is the age of democracy. We know what we have to do. We don't need an organization to tell us what to do. It's in all our traditions. We can do it ourselves. And we can begin it ourselves and initiate it ourselves. And that was the purpose of putting the Charter online at the beginning, so that it comes from the bottom up. Not that any of you are at the bottom, isn't it? But it comes not as a sort of an encyclical letter, or because people don't respond to that so much anymore. How many encyclical letters I've sat through in my childhood, and I can't see that we ever raced out and did it. It needs to come from below.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'm scanning the room here. Don't be shy. Right over here in the corner.
My name's Brennan Viola. I'm a freshman in the McDonough School of Business. You talked about a sense of urgency, and I think considering that it's important that this message reach people, and it's most important that this message reach people that may be the least likely to receive this message. How do you intend to reach out, especially through a grassroots movement that may have less religious authority than working through, a top-down structure, to reach these people that would be the least receptive to this message?
Well, of course, that's the challenge. And you have to understand that I realize the enormity of what lies ahead. There is no quick fix on this. And it's no good thinking we just send the message out and everyone says, "Oh, right, okay," and immediately see the error of their ways and become compassionate from Sunday onwards. This is not going to happen. And people are not going to, a lot of people don't want to be compassionate. But there are enough of us to start. We can start, and we have to start with ourselves. And before we go racing out trying to convert other people, remember that it must start from within. Just to change the conversation, bring something new. And that when more and more hate stuff comes out, we need to swell the voice that speaks inclusively and with respect. We need to get that discourse out there, because all too often it's the voices that hit the media are those that are aggressive and extremist, or even just sort of self-satisfied. There are lots of self-satisfied people on the media. So this was an attempt also to change the conversation, to bring something else onto the table. Let's just begin with that. But make sure that our voice is vibrant, compelling, true, accurate, and informed. And do it all day, every day, persistently, not giving up, even when it's discouraging. And just to have another voice out there. I had a conversation here in Washington last year with, it was a roundtable discussion like this with leading people from the media about their presentation of religion in the media. And they said to me that unless there's tension in a story, it won't hit the media. The idea that, so somehow we need to make a story of this, make a narrative. It needn't be sensational, but somehow learn how to, make compassion attractive and cool. I'd like it to be cool to be compassionate, not sort of sloppy, but cool, because it demands a lot. But it was a good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you've mentioned a couple of times, this is a process, and this launch is just a new beginning. We're delighted that you've come to Georgetown. As you can see, there's lots of enthusiasm here. As a university, I think we can bring a lot to this project. The Berkley Center is already signed on as an official partner. We've set up a website dedicated to compassion with a kind of an academic angle that allows users to come in and trace the idea of compassion over time, across traditions, across thematic areas, and that's something we hope to build out that can accompany this process. We do have some time afterwards for reception out in the back. It'll give us an opportunity to continue the conversation, I hope. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Hope you can stick around. I'd also like to thank Melody, who helped to put together the event, and Anna from TED. But most of all, I'd like to thank Karen Armstrong for being here with us today.